Good morning. My name is Caitlin Watts. I am with Maynard Costerisan, and I am our client service manager here with the firm. Today we have a CPE for lunch for Intacct, release 2 highlights. The release date is actually Friday, so we're ahead of the game, which is exciting. I have Wes Salisbury on the line today. He will be presenting those releases, or those highlights for that release. There we go. All right, Wes, go ahead and take it from here.
All right, thank you, Kate. Appreciate it. Good morning, everyone. As probably a fair amount of you are probably pretty familiar with me at this point, my name is Wes Salisbury, and if you've been an Intacct client of ours for more than a few months, you probably know who I am. So I don't really, you probably don't need to hear too much about me. I don't probably need to introduce too much of myself. But I did want to talk about this upcoming release of Intacct 2021 Release 2. So if you go out on your Intacct homepage, the upcoming release notes are actually published along with a lot of really nice and helpful walkthroughs and videos that Intacct gives you. So there's not going to be a lot of things I walk through step by step as part of today. Today is just more of our opinions, or my opinions, as to what are the cool features that are included as part of this, generally how they work, ones that you should be taking a look at using sooner rather than later. Because really all these features are free. They're going to be automatically woven into your instance on the 21st. That being said, they release it like at end of day on Fridays. So it's not like a Friday morning thing that it gets released. It's more of like a Friday night. So it gets released over the weekend technically, but you don't want to be working on the weekend. So you can check it out on the following Monday. So let me go ahead and progress on to here. So at the end of this PowerPoint presentation, there are some features that I do want to at least do a little bit of walkthrough and a little bit of demonstration on, mostly because they are transformative in nature and they're really relatively simple to build. But I did want to talk about kind of abstractly what some of the major themes are surrounding this particular release, as well as I didn't do a ranking, but some of the cooler features that Intacct released or will release in a couple days, or has already released if you're watching this in the future. So one of the major themes as part of release 2 are some major enhancements to bank feeds. So the automated bank feeds functionality, where Intacct is looking up for bank transactions up for your checking accounts and your credit cards, things like that. Even if you don't have bank feeds set up, Intacct has built in some more reconciliation enhancements for like a spreadsheet import. If you're taking a CSV file and importing it into Intacct for your bank account, I'm actually going to spend a lot of time talking about this today because I'm really excited about it, and it's really part of kind of the next generation of building some intelligence into business systems. So we'll be talking about that today. Also, other things that another major theme as part of this and really the last couple releases are more enhancements surrounding general ledger journal entry approvals, as well as outlier detection. So I want to kind of focus in on outlier detection a little bit, because when it comes to detecting journal entries that fall kind of outside of the normal behavior of a particular account or department or other dimension, Intacct uses, I like to call it a buzzword, but it's really not a buzzword anymore. It uses machine learning in order to learn about what the normal pattern is for transacting and when something deviates from that. So you're also going to hear me kind of talk about machine learning, how Intacct's outlier detection for journal entry approvals is just the first of many steps in coming years that's going to really be transformative to your business and really the industry as a whole, because it's kind of off topic, but yeah, machine learning is just becoming such a major discipline in a lot of spaces as part of this decade so far. But so those top two options I mentioned are a little bit more forward-looking, a little bit more kind of long-term transformative things. But there are some cool features that you can just start utilizing today with really no setup needed or learning time needed. So Intacct also did release on their dimension balances report the ability to report on budget versus actual in a trial balance format. To me, this is pretty cool because traditionally you had a bunch of options to validate that your actuals looked good with like a trial balance and really, I guess, multiple flavors of trial balances. But when it comes to traditionally, when it came to running reports based off of budget, your only option was essentially financial reports. And the trouble with financial reports is that you can theoretically leave accounts off of your financial reports, and then it becomes difficult to figure out what did you forget. So that's pretty exciting to me, and we'll talk about that later as well. And for those of our clients on the call today who are using either purchasing or order entry, Intacct is also releasing the ability to gain an insight over how does each transaction hit your general ledger when it gets posted. Because traditionally, if you post something inside of purchasing, let's just say it's in purchasing, and you hit post, since you use item codes inside of purchasing and not necessarily general ledger numbers, you sometimes need to run a general ledger report or something similar to figure out, did this post correctly? And you kind of need to do some cross-referencing and some manual work to just verify that the posting is correct. But Intacct is going to be adding a tab that allows you to see the GL impact of a purchasing or order entry transaction before or without jumping through hoops in order to find it out. So I just talked about the major themes. Now I'm going to dig into some of the individual deliverables. And so as I mentioned before, I'm going to try to cover these in the order that I stated them under the prior slide. But inside of the cash management, or really the bank recon module, if you do have your checking accounts or savings accounts or credit card accounts hooked up to your bank feeds directly, one of the enhancements that Intacct has made, or is it's gonna, I feel like since it hasn't happened yet, but by the time some people watch this, it's already going to be in the past. So I'm confusing myself when it comes to past, present, and future tense. So please excuse me if I don't get it quite right. But since Intacct is going to be enhancing this on Friday, bank feeds now are actually going to refresh every 4 hours. So Intacct is consistently going to be looking up at your bank to say, or to pull new transactions every 4 hours in the background. This is in comparison to what's happening now, where these either get refreshed when you go in to start a reconciliation, or it's just more of like a manual refresh, which is kind of annoying. So Intacct does a lot better job of keeping your bank feeds up to date by refreshing it in the background every 4 hours. And the reason why they're refreshing it every 4 hours as opposed to something more frequent is you have to think of server strains, transaction load, things like that. When you do it every 4 hours, it gives even the most, it even gives you as a client with many different accounts, it gives Intacct plenty of time to synchronize. So the next, really, the major thing I actually the big, probably the number one feature as part of this release is the ability to create customized matching rules as part of your auto reconciliation process. And these are relevant whether you're using your automated bank feeds or if maybe that's not an option and you're just importing your bank transactions by way of CSV. So traditionally, the way that this was done is essentially Intacct had pretty static logic when it came to how items got automatically matched. Traditionally, you could choose things get matched on either document number and or amount and or date, which for things like checks, that ends up working decently well because when your bank, so your checks on your bank side typically clear with the same check numbers as the check numbers on the Intacct side. So you get that true one-to-one match between the document number in Intacct and then the document number on the bank side. So that traditionally worked pretty well. But the thing that Intacct didn't have traditionally is it didn't really give you a great automated ability to build logic in that says, oh, for this day, for this account, like group together all the transactions for one day on the bank side and try to match it on the Intacct side or vice versa. Or maybe for certain types of payments that go out, or maybe for certain vendors that you pay there or sales that you receive, the logic between how they're posted on Intacct and how they're posted on your bank side are different. So that's pretty much just a long way of saying that Intacct now gives you the ability to kind of build in some logic that says, if it's like this payment type, then summarize the activity for a day and then match it up with the summarized activity on the bank side. So I don't have a ton of ability to demonstrate this in a live setting because I'm kind of working with a bit of a kind of bare bones type of Intacct instance today, and I don't have a test bank account to connect it to. So, but we can at least talk about it, and I can show you the way this works and how this logic gets assigned to accounts and things like that. I just did a whole bunch of talking surrounding cash management, and then I'm going to translate over into the general ledger. Probably the main thing that is getting released on the general ledger side, and this has been something that they've been working on the past few periods, but it is part of general availability now, just as a reminder. And I don't know if there are any clients who started using this yet, but there is an option for you in your subscriptions that allow you to enable this GL outlier detection. So what happens here is first of all, there's this intelligent GL subscription. I believe it's a free subscription in your subscriptions tab that allows you to switch on the service, and that works in conjunction with your journal entry approval process to essentially it starts the process of building out a data model. So it builds out a data model that holds what your normal activity is when it comes to journal entries and things of that nature. So what happens is when staffers or other people in your organization submit journal entries for approval, it goes to the approver, and then over time the approver is going to say, I approve of this, I decline this. So what happens is every time the approver accepts or declines a journal entry, that trains the machine learning algorithms to say, like, hey, this is a potentially misstated item, but this item is okay. So what happens is over time is it accumulates all those different approvals and declines to figure out and find patterns behind like behind what your normal behavior is for journal entry posting. And then based on that, that will then drive this little flag on the approval screen for journal entries that says, like, this journal entry is at a high risk of misstatement because it doesn't match historical transactions, or if it falls right in line with the way that journal entries are posted historically, then it's going to say it's a low risk. You probably don't have to dig as much into it. Now, machine learning algorithms and things like that are pretty confidential, intelligent properties. So I actually don't know the particular processes that Intacct is using to assign its weights and biases surrounding this behavior. But just to give you an example of how this works, let's just say every month you have a prepaid expense amortization entry that you make. So the way that this works is, let's just say you debit expense, and then you credit, or I should say you debit, we'll just say software expense, and then you credit your prepaid asset account. So traditionally, let's just say this type of entry, when it gets posted, uses your administrative department as its dimension tag. So let's just say for 12 months, the system got used to you amortizing your software expense to the administrative department. Well, let's just say a staffer creates the entry this month, and then they tag it with like an operations department code or a completely unrelated department code. Since Intacct recognizes that, hey, this journal entry is a lot different than the one you usually post, so it's going to flag that as a high risk of misstatement. It could totally be correct, but it gives the approver kind of a heads up saying, hey, this is usually what we normally see, so make sure you take extra care to review it. So probably as part of machine learning, I probably in hindsight should have put a little graph up here or a flow chart that shows how the whole learning process happens. And really, even though this particular application of machine learning may not be incredibly helpful to you because maybe you're not using journal entry approvals, or maybe your number of journal entries is so small that you don't really have as much of a need to approve it's easy to go in and really perform surgery on each one. But I guess the point why I want to make sure I talk about this for a little bit is machine learning is one of those disciplines and one of those things that it's not going to be just woven into Intacct over time, but you're going to find more and more softwares and more pieces of your operation are going to be impacted by machine learning. So this is almost like your first step into that world, to learn how machine learning works. And even if it doesn't give you a ton of time savings on the Intacct side right now, it could have future applications down the line. So I'll get off my soapbox a little bit surrounding that. Cool. Yeah. When it comes to things like this is where the really nerdy side of me comes out. So thank you for allowing me to really have my nerdy side shine through here. So let's kind of get back to things that we can use right here and now with little to no setup. So for those of you who are using journal entry approvals, there is now an approval history link within journal entries that are submitted. So this was always something that has been available inside of purchasing and in accounts payable and things like that, that allow you to figure out whose turn is it to approve this PO, whose turn is it to approve this bill. But traditionally, there wasn't an ability for you to figure out whose turn is it to approve the journal entry. Well, now there is an approval history link for submitted journal entries that says whose queue is it in. And then finally, surrounding when journal entry approvals are sent out, Intacct will now give you the ability. So once again, traditionally, approvers would get emails, just like one email per entry when they had something to approve, which that works all right when you only have maybe a journal entry here and there you have to approve. But if you're running a wide, like a big enterprise, maybe multi-state enterprise, you have staffers all over the place posting journal entries. You may get 25 every day, or maybe not every day, but on certain days where you don't want to completely like break your inbox. So instead of getting an email for one per transaction that needs to be approved, Intacct will now give you the ability to have a summary reminder that gets sent out on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, or even a monthly basis. So if you are using journal entry approvals and the people who approve those entries has ever said, like, is it possible to maybe receive, like, not receive as many emails, you now will have the ability to define that. So I wanted to make sure I threw that out as well. As I mentioned before, there is an actual versus budget trial balance, and it's actually under the dimension balances report inside of General Ledger. And just as a refresher or a heads up for those of you who have not used the dimension balances report yet, the dimension balances report is a report that takes your main account segment and allows you to weave in your balances split out also by department or location or company or function, vendor, customer, item, all the different dimensions in the system. Because this is in contrast to your normal trial balance, which your normal trial balance only gives you a summary on your main account segment. But the dimension balances report gives you that nice detailed split out of all of your balances by location and department and every combination therein. But the dimension balances report now allows you to weave in actuals and or budgets together. So you can theoretically run a report just with a trial balance, essentially just with budget numbers instead of actuals. In the event where you wanted to do that, once again, this was one of those things that you can kind of use it how you please, but I thought it was really cool. So I think this might be the last item I had under General Ledger for now, but Intacct also is adding a new dashboard element or dashboard component or dashlet, whatever you want to call it, called closure status. So this is a dashboard item that allows you to quickly see which entities are still open or closed for whatever periods, and whether their subledgers have been closed out as well. So for those of you who like to practice a bit more of a, I'm going to say, a more like step-by-step closing process where, like, for each entity, maybe you close up AR first, and then you close up AP, and then finally you close up the GL. And then when you do something like that, this element is going to be really useful for you to track the progress of your close process. Once again, it may not be one of those things that everyone uses, but for those of you who have who do a lot of work or have a step-by-step process to closing, that may be a good thing to add to a dashboard. Okay, so I'm going to be showing this in a second here. But so if you want to check out the GL posting insights in either your purchasing or your order entry modules, essentially what you've got to do is when you go out to purchasing or order entry and you go out to your transactions listing, essentially you have the ability to go in and hit view on a transaction. And then underneath that tab, it'll show the posting details. So the one point of illustration here, and I want to make sure I point this out because this actually fooled me for a second when I was playing around with this also. So when you are going out onto, let's just say purchasing, and I usually like to hit edit on transactions in order to look at them, but in order to see the GL posting, you have to hit view. Edit won't work, which after I thought about it a little bit, that actually makes a lot of sense because when it comes to GL posting, you don't actually know how it's going to post until you post it. So if you open it up in edit mode, it's thinking that, hey, the old posting is going to be irrelevant because you're in and editing it. So pretty much just a long-winded way of saying, go out to purchase order or go out to your purchasing or order entry modules, hit view transaction, and then you'll see the posting details tab. And then it'll tell you how your transactions are posting through to the GL, as well as your subledgers. Because once again, inside of purchasing and order entry, you may not have GL codes over in those modules. You're using item identifiers, and those item identifiers may not tell you which account it actually posts to. So this is a quick way for you to see without really jumping through any hoops to figure out how things post. So I wanted to make sure I talked about that. And then I have a tab for others, and then we will go ahead and get to a little bit more of a dive into those. In particular, I wanted to make sure we spent a good amount of time. We spent a good amount of time. I feel like I misspoke there, but we're going to be spending a good amount of time on configuring those logics for bank auto matching in the reconciliation process. But before we get to that, I did want to note that in accounts payable, you now have the ability to cancel payment requests in bulk, which is actually a really nice departure from tradition because, so let's just say you selected, let's just say 100 checks. So you selected 100 checks to print as part of a pay run, but then you found out later on, or when you went to print them, you realized that your payment date was messed up, or even like you selected the wrong payment method or something like that. Maybe you selected cash instead of printed check. You know, it happens. Traditionally, you'd have to go in and cancel them one by one through the interface. There's been, you can also do like mass cancellations through the API, but that was something that once in a while I'd get from a client and I would help them out, but that's something you've got to coordinate, and it's something that you need a consultant's help with and things like that. But nowadays, you have the ability to just say, cancel all 100 or 1,000 requests and then put them back in. So that's a nice feature. So if you make a mistake, you're not spending an entire morning or afternoon fixing all of your payment requests. So others, the other I wanted to talk about here are checklists. So checklists have been around for, I think, 1 or 2 releases, but Intacct itself is building in native functionality to help assist you with your closing process. And it allows you to do that by assigning checklists and essentially task items to your staffers to say, like, oh, hey, this staffer should do this, this, and this as part of month-end close. And then you can attach worksheets and things like that. And then you can assign deadlines and notifications and things like that. And there's been third-party options throughout the years that Intacct interfaces with surrounding this. So this isn't a new concept in the grand scheme of things, but this is a new concept in the sense that Intacct has built it internally, and it is a free, I mean, it's not really a separate subscription. It's just a free thing that you just switch on by way of permission. So those continue to be enhanced. So if you are currently looking for ways to streamline your close process inside of Intacct, I would most certainly suggest you take a look at checklists. And finally, this is actually something that's a little bit more exciting for we consultants, because when we onboard new clients, we typically have a handful of videos we have them watch. But what Intacct has given, not only just new clients, but also all of you on the call as well, is out on the Intacct Learning Center, they now have a free Intacct Fundamentals course that is all self-contained. It's on demand, it's self-guided. It walks you through all of the appropriate steps of the Intacct basics, like how do I put in and pay bills? How do I generate AR statements? How do I use purchasing? How do I build reports? All the things that you need to use Intacct, it teaches you. And it's not just, and you know, even if you're a veteran user of Intacct, I think it'd probably still be a good way to get some practice in a sandbox environment, get some new perspectives on things, and you may learn a few things from it that you didn't already know. And for those of you who need CPE, you know, those of you on the call who have letters after your name, this training is available or is eligible for 8 hours of CPE. So it's a free course. You learn about Intacct, you get CPE out of it. It's on demand and self-paced. You really can't go wrong with it. So that is out on the Intacct Learning Center. And if you don't have access to the Intacct Learning Center, please feel free to send us a note. And I know this is not the end of the presentation, but this is the end of the slideshow. If you have any questions as to how do I get to the Learning Center, or how do I get on the Intacct community, or anything related to today's session, as well as any others like questions you may have, feel free to send a note off to support@mainersolutions.com, and either myself or one of my colleagues will pick it up and we will go through the process with you and answer your questions. So the main thing I want to show you today, I can't really show you, even though I get excited about it, I can't really talk to you much about that GL outlier detection, that machine learning algorithm, because first of all, you need months of data to really have it assess a trend. And really, as a consultant, I'm not really using and approving things in Intacct on a day-to-day basis. So as much as I'd like to display that and show you how that works, I don't really have a great medium in order to do it today. But what I did want to talk about is what I believe is one of the more significant things as part of this release are our matching rules. So these are our matching rules for transactions as part of your bank or credit card reconciliations, whether you're using bank feeds directly or you're just importing a CSV file. So these are the rules that allow you to create your customized logic for how you match things up. So I already did a little bit of setup prior. So you might need to give yourself permissions to this if you don't see it. But if you give yourself permissions under cache management, you will be able to go under the setup tab under matching rules. And let's just look at our rule set. So you can think of rule sets as a container that hold as many other individual rules as you want. So an easy way for me to kind of describe this is I already set up a sample rule set here. And within a particular rule set, I have individual rules as part of it. So essentially, you set up a rule set, it's a container of rules, and underneath this area, this is where you can select and add and modify all these different rules that make up the rule set. So now that we've designated what a rule set is, let's talk a little bit about what rules are. So I already have a couple rules here, and by the way, I'm sorry, let me back up a second here. So when we think of rules in this context, we can think of each one of these as individual processes that an end user might use when reconciling an account. So let's just say you have a step in your bank reconciliation process where you have to kind of specially mark off all of your sales journal entries, right? So maybe those of you in the restaurant in the restaurant arena, you're getting journal entries that have all of your daily sales, and those can kind of get messy. So you create a specific rule that marks those off. But within that rule, you can set up some logic like, I care only about matching up. So under the filter transaction by pane here, you can build in an instruction that says, for this step, I only care about Intacct transactions that have a description field that equals POS posting. So essentially this just says, I'm only looking at my POS posting items. I'm not doing anything. I'm not matching up anything besides my point of sale postings. And then on this area right here, this pane right here, where it says group Intacct transaction by, the reason why I used POS, why I used the restaurant example and POS posting here is when you're interfacing in with your point of sale systems or you're importing the activity, usually you're importing daily sales across potentially several stores, and each one of those stores, their sales hits the same bank account. So by selecting this group Intacct transaction by option for posting date, I'm telling Intacct to say, hey, combine all of my point of sale postings for a particular day, sum those all up together, and then try to match those up to your bank, try to match those up to your bank transactions based on the posting date as well as amount. So for this one, this is actually a little bit more of a complex example. We're going to be getting into a more general example in a moment, but I just wanted to illustrate for you that you have the ability to essentially summarize your Intacct activity for a day based on a particular field, like field content, and sum those up together and then have those try to auto match more correctly up as part of your bank reconciliation. So the way that these rule sets work is it runs each one of these step by step. So the first step it does is it tries to perform the special logic that we built in for our sales, our point of sale entries. But then directly after that, let's just say once I do that, that's really the only curveball thing I need to build in. So my second step after I mark all of those transactions as reconciled, I can use a more traditional criteria rule here where I'm not doing anything in the filter area. I'm not doing anything I'm not grouping by anything. I'm not summarizing by doc number or posting date. Instead, I'm just applying the more traditional logic of the document number on the bank side needs to equal the Intacct transaction document number, and then the amount on the bank side needs to equal the amount on the Intacct side. So this is the more traditional rule set. Excuse me. So this is the more traditional rule set, but I did want to walk you through just creating another one. I don't really have any particular example that we can really illustrate here, but let's just call it test rule. And by the way, since this is still a fairly new feature, there's going to be a lot of functionality that they have planned for the future that just isn't here yet. So bear in mind that it's not in beta, but it's like still early in its development. So there's going to be more features added over time. But under my filter transaction by area, I can say I only care for Intacct transactions that have, once again, a description that equals something, a document number that equals something in particular, amounts, dates, things like that. So we don't really have a ton of fields here to choose from, and the only operator that's available right now is equals, which I'm sure they're going to add more in the future, like contains and starts with, ends with, stuff like that. But they just haven't gotten there yet. But that's okay because you have to start somewhere. And then down here in the matching conditions area, this is where you can say, like, I want to match based on amount or a doc number. Actually, this is actually worth noting. Depending on who your bank is, when you go up and get your transactions from your bank by way of the bank feeds, sometimes your bank likes to like left pad your check numbers or your document numbers with zeros. So you may have just printed and sent out check 1000 and it's check number 1000 on the Intacct side, but your bank registers it as check number 0001000. So if you want to match your transactions based on document number, they do have an option here to cut off your leading zeros. That way you have that more sophisticated matching process that, you know, having leading zeros isn't going to break your, isn't going to cause extra work for you. So really, once again, I know that I can't really fully demonstrate this because I don't have a bank feed transaction hooked up, and this is kind of a, like I said, a bare bones type of Intacct setup. But this was actually really cool to me to dig into because if you were doing this to build out all these different pieces of logic traditionally, like outside of Intacct, you would have to do a bunch of query language stuff, or you have to do a whole bunch of interesting stuff in Excel in order to make things match up more closely. And beyond that, sometimes as part of the consultancy process here in past projects, you would have to be cognizant of how things get posted on the Intacct side to help make sure that things get matched up to the bank transactions automatically, because traditionally there wasn't a ton of flexibility. Of course, as a consultant, we as consultants here on the Mainer side, we're still going to be cognizant and careful about how transactions get posted so that it minimizes the level of effort to reconcile your transactions with your bank. But in the event where something slips through the cracks or something new pops up that we didn't account for, Intacct does give you the ability to build in some kind of fuzzy logic, so to speak, that allows you to catch some of these things. So that was really about it that I needed to talk about today. Oh, wait, no, actually, I lied. Let me just take 1 second here. I did mention earlier that one of the cool features that Intacct released is the ability to examine the GL posting of, let's just say, a purchasing transaction or an order entry transaction without jumping through hoops in order to find it. So for those of you who are using purchasing, and out of the two modules I mentioned, most clients are using purchasing. Let's just say I pop open a vendor invoice here, and I just have one out here. I'm going to hit view under my vendor invoice transaction here. And just for some perspective, this is why it's useful. This is why the posting details tab is useful, because you may have an item called, you may give it a name, or it may just be something general like this, or even named like random item. Well, how do I know exactly which account random item writes to, which account it uses? Well, you can kind of dispel some of that, or you can answer some of that by going under the posting details tab and then seeing, in this case, a vendor invoice impacts both the AP subledger as well as your general ledger. So it actually shows you, here's the posted AP bill that you can click all the way through if you wanted to. And then this is only a transaction for $1, but then you'd also be able to see, was this bill paid? Was it paid, right? But then since when something posts to the subledger, it also posts to the general ledger, it shows you the general ledger activity here. So it shows you that this is more relevant for the folks who are doing cash and accrual, or a blend of the two. You can see that it hit your accrual books, hit the AP journal, posted this day, and then this is where it hit the account number. So I can see that it hit account number 60,000 office expense. So I can see that it debited for $1. Don't get too confused over what the difference between the debit amount and a debit TXN amount is. These should always be the same. The only difference between these two are some clients, not a lot of our clients, but some clients need multi-currency set up inside of Intacct. So the dollar amount in the transactional currency may be different from the dollar amount using the base currency of the company. So we debit office expense, hit it for entity one, and then the offset is, of course, account 20,000, accounts payable, and that's where we see the dollar credit. So once again, there are some tricks that you may already employ to review how things in order entry and purchasing hit the general ledger, but this is just like a really quick way to get at the source without jumping through any hoops. So now that's all I had left to talk about. So Kate, I'll turn it back over to you.
Fabulous. As always, if you have any questions, later on you get into the new release on Monday and you go, okay, Wes discussed X, Y, and Z. Can't remember what it was. You can go ahead and either reach out to Wes at his email address. Do you want to pop that back up for us?
Sure. So I have the email spread out a little bit here. This is our general support. This is our general support email. So if you send an email off to support@mainersolutions.com, it'll get routed to our support queue. So Kate will see it, our project manager will see it, and it's going to get proper oversight across multiple people. And then whoever is available and who's able to answer your question will then respond to you. For those inquiries that are very specific to me, you can hit me up at wsalisbury@mainersolutions.com. But if you have a general question that can be answered by anyone, go to support@mainersolutions.com. because that way, if I'm taking a day off or I'm not available, that's someone will be able to help you without you waiting too long.
Wes doesn't take vacations. Just kidding. So yeah, feel free to use that support. If you have any questions or concerns, maybe not pertaining to this presentation or a need, feel free to reach out to support or myself. Mine is just kwatts@manersolutions.com. So yeah, that is it for today. So
all right, thank you all. Thank you for joining, and we'll talk to you next time.